All right, thanks a lot. We continue to follow these heavy races tonight, and a lot is going on. Jim Heath from Ohio News Network is joining me now. We want to take a look through Vote Tracker at what you're going to be able to see tonight. But first, let's take a look at last election, 2006, right?
Keep your eyes on the red and blue. These were Ken Blackwell counties from 4 years ago in red. He only carried 15 counties, Jerry, of the 88 in the state of Ohio. Right. John Kasich down there in Hamilton County, where Blackwell only won with 49% of the vote. Kasich expects to blow Ted Strickland out tonight. He expects a much heavier Republican turnout to his benefit. So then you go to Central Ohio. Again, expecting the sea of red to come crashing towards Central Ohio and Franklin County. Strickland won it with 65% of the vote 4 years ago. Kasich told me yesterday he believes he's going to win Franklin County. That would be a huge turnover there and a huge block of votes. So how does the governor win re-election tonight? Well, the northeast part of the state, always the Democratic hub for the state of Ohio. Cuyahoga County was very big for Ted Strickland, but just in the last few minutes, Jerry, we've learned that voter turnout expectations in Cuyahoga County has been lowered from 400,000 votes to 300,000. The vote turnout, seemingly, as of right now, is not there. It may not be enough to help Ted Strickland get re-election tonight.
Yeah, and he really needed a good turnout. Let's take a look at this year. Tonight's election. Now, this is
very
what we've
early
got
numbers.
So far. Yeah, very early here. We've got, what is that? Jackson County. Looks like Kasich is leading Strickland with, that's probably absentee ballots, right?
Yeah, and it's still very early, but keep in mind, this was very blue. This was a very blue part of the state of Ohio. That's Ted Strickland territory. That's where he was born and raised. That's where he grew up. He always expects a big turnout there in the southeastern part of the state. If John Kasich begins to turn some of those blue counties in this part of the state red, then this could be an early night. Kasich could have a much easier victory than anybody expected.
Well, how long do you think tonight's going to be, though?
I can't go there. This race has been close all along, but I will say this. I just spoke to Sam Gresham from Common Cause, a longtime Democratic activist, who said if that number in Cuyahoga County is below 300,000 votes, he expects an early call for John Kasich.
And this is very important for the bigger party, the national party, deciding what happens here in the governor's race, right?
And there's a reason why President Obama has been back to the Buckeye State 12 times now in the last year, and the reason why is that as he looks to his re-election effort in 2012, he'd much rather have Democrats and Ted Strickland in control of the State House than John Kasich. All eyes will be on that governor's race from the White House in Washington, D.C. And, Jerry, what's really fascinating tonight, the big winner of all may be on the Republican side, Rob Portman. There are already rumors that Rob Portman is going to be on a very short list for a Republican vice presidential slot because he kind of fits the criteria.
Right, and he's already won tonight. AP's already called that.
Big victory.
Thanks a lot, Jim. We'll be talking to you throughout the night. Sure. Andrea, over to you.
That's kind of interesting news. Let's go down to Republican headquarters then and see.
Well, it's still early numbers, but we should emphasize here what we talked about at the beginning of this night, which was that Strickland was likely to take a lead in the governor's race with absentee ballots. But then the votes from southwestern Ohio, Cincinnati, into central Ohio would begin to come in. Eve, if you can, let's take a look at 2006. I think this is really going to emphasize what is beginning to be the headline of the hour and sort of the story of the night. Ken Blackwell covered and carried just 15 counties. If we can take that, he carried just 15 counties back in 2006. Again, Ohio always a swing state. Red versus blue. Blackwell underperformed by all accounts, ending the night with just 37% of the vote 4 years ago. But nonetheless, he got 15 of Ohio's 88 counties. Now, 16, I'm sorry, corrected there. 16 counties of the 88. We talked about at the beginning of this night that Kasich was going to have to expand that red. He was particularly going to have to expand it into central Ohio, where there's a huge block of votes in Franklin County. Ted Strickland won Franklin County 4 years ago with 65% of the vote. And Eve, if we can, let's go to the updated numbers from tonight. Keep that number in mind, 65% from 4 years ago. He's holding it with 52% right now, with a lot more votes to be counted in Franklin County. But look at that map. Look at where the red is at. John Kasich now is overperforming by a large margin here Ken Blackwell, which was to be expected. But the Kasich strategy was always to make it very deep red in the southwest part of the state, flip from blue to red the central part of Ohio, and begin to eat away at that Democratic base in the northeast part of Ohio. And as you can see, he's beginning to make inroads and do exactly that. Our good friend Joe Hallett from the Columbus Dispatch joins us now. Good evening, Joe.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, you're watching this. We've covered this campaign for over a year now. It pretty much is breaking the way we thought, right? I mean, big Republican vote in the southwest part of the state. It's fairly competitive in the central part of the state. And the big question, I guess, at the hour of this hour for Democrats is whether the vote turnout will be enough in Cuyahoga County.
Yeah, we are seeing that the absentee ballots in Cuyahoga County favor Strickland by about 58%. I'm sure you'd rather have that up to about 60%. We've seen some exit polls, though, that show him ahead with female voters, 52 to 45. If that holds true, then he could have a good night. So we're just seeing conflicting numbers right now, conflicting indicators, and it's really just too early to know what's going to happen.
Joe, from all indicators across the country, there seems to be this angry vote turnout. A lot of independents now, where they voted with Democrats 2 years ago, are voting with Republicans tonight. Any indication in the state of Ohio, at least at this point, that they're lining up with Kasich, that they broke for Kasich with this independent vote?
Yeah, well, I think that the independent vote probably will break more for Kasich than Strickland. Again, it's a numbers game. It's who turns out. As Democrats have this vaunted turnout machine that they have claimed will always overcome any sort of tidal wave that the Republicans might enjoy this year. And I guess we're still waiting for that. The turnout in Cuyahoga County, where Strickland has to win by at least 100,000 votes, is not that strong. It didn't reach the 50% level, I understand. But Strickland also has shown strength in rural areas, and he'll benefit there in the rural areas by dint of his endorsement from the NRA. So he is kind of an uncommon Democrat, and the traditional map may not hold as normal here in Ohio.
Latest results, guys, 14% of the vote reporting here. We now have a tie, 48% to 48%. We talked about this at the beginning of the evening, that Strickland would take an early lead with absentees, and then at about this point, just after 9 o'clock, we would see Kasich begin to take the lead as the southwest part of the state begins to report in, along with central Ohio. And we're going to wait to see what Cuyahoga County does, but the Democrats are probably going to watch Ted Strickland fall behind now, and then all eyes will be on Cuyahoga County as we get into that 11 o'clock hour to see whether there are enough Democratic votes there to catch him back up and take the lead again.
Well, which comes back to your point that you made early on in the evening, Jim, that voting is actually down in Cuyahoga County this year. Yeah, estimations at the beginning of the day from the elections director up there was 430,000 likely voters. She lowered that to 410,000 at 2 o'clock this afternoon. There's an indication that that number might be less than that, and that is certainly bad news. As you heard Sam Gresham say from Common Cause, a longtime Democratic activist, if that number drops below that 400,000 mark, Strickland probably can't win. Now, that's his estimation, but I think a lot of Democrats feel the same way, that now Kasich, at this time of the night, is going to begin to take that lead as those big Republican rural votes, Hamilton County votes, Franklin County votes come in, and it's going to be a question of whether Strickland can catch up again when we head to the northeast kind of Democratic part of the state of Ohio. That will be the big question mark, and if those votes are not there, if that's below 400,000 votes total, then there might not be enough for the governor to catch up.
And you know, Jim, just seeing those numbers, 48% and 48%, just gives me visions and maybe nightmares, actually, of a recount or hanging chads and lawsuits and everything else that you remember, especially over the past 10 years. And you know, you had Dan Tkaji on before, the elections expert, talking about there's not really any problems until a race is close. So it's this close race that begs for those problems that arise in the form of lawsuits and whatnot.
Well, as Dan pointed out, you know, he's one of the few that likes to watch the sausage being made, and that's what elections are. You know, we all enjoy eating sausage. We don't like to see the process. He's one of the few that actually enjoys this election process, because sometimes it is an unexact science. Sometimes when you get down to these really close votes, there are arguments about where these votes were really meant to be cast or how they were cast. We hope that we don't have to see that. The Kasich campaign has been very optimistic all along that by the end of the night there would simply not be enough of a turnout. The unions would not be able to turn out the vote. African Americans, minorities, college kids, that coalition that made Democrats very lethal 2 years ago, really 4 years ago in Ohio, but 2 years ago nationally, they were convinced that that coalition was not going to be available in this midterm, particularly with so many angry voters out there. We're seeing the trends nationally. This is a Republican year. How big that wave is, we don't know yet. But the Kasich campaign has thought all along that the wave would be big enough to include him in the state of Ohio.
Jim, let's switch gears now, and we're going to talk about the Senate race, which was over more than almost 2 hours ago now. Some would argue it was over days and even weeks ago. But Rob Portman is expected to speak shortly from the Republican headquarters, and Lee Fisher is also expected to speak from the Democratic headquarters. You can see Rob Portman projected by the AP. It was just after 7:30, after the polls closed, that Rob Portman was projected to be our next U.S. Senator from the state of Ohio.
As you might recall, back in 1998, when Fisher conceded the governor's race, there was a little ruckus up on the lectern and the podium when he conceded defeat that particular year. Hopefully we won't have a repeat of that. But the Fisher campaign never really got going after he won the primary. He beat Jennifer Bruner, but fundraising was always a big issue in this race. And to Portman's credit, look, if there's a nominee for the best campaign of the year, I think Portman's got to be considered. That campaign was well-oiled, it was well-run, he was well-financed. The ironic thing is he was the budget director for George W. Bush, who Democrats have argued all along was responsible for the bad economy that we're in right now. And amazingly, Rob Portman was never really connected to that. And now, guys, tonight, there's a big rumor that Rob Portman will be on the very short list for vice president for the Republican ticket in 2 years from now. Republicans need Ohio to win presidential elections. Portman now has been vetted. He's won an easy, big race for the United States Senate. You might want to keep your eye on him. He might be the biggest winner of all tonight if he hits the national scene and is considered on a national ticket in just 2 years.
Okay, a lot of races we're following, a lot of tight races. First round of coffee on Jim Heath this evening.
Don't you love it? Come on, this is the Super Bowl.
Something like.
If you think back to Scott Brown's election in Massachusetts, a Republican winning in a very blue state to take the seat of Teddy Kennedy, that was really the tip-off that this was going to happen tonight, quite frankly. Democrats have battled hard. They've tried to remind everybody of the economic conditions left by Republicans and a Republican president 2 years ago. But you know what? At the end of the day, whoever's in power usually gets the blame. And this is not out of the historical norm. People forget, Republicans in particular forget, that Ronald Reagan was at 35% approval at his first midterm in 1982 when Republicans took a big beating because the economy had not turned around. Of course, Ronald Reagan came back 2 years later and won 49 of 50 states. 1994 is often the parallel for tonight, guys, when Republicans came flooding in. Bill Clinton was unpopular. The health care bill was unpopular. So there's sort of the American people, when they think that something's going too far one direction, 2 years later, they kind of quickly redirect that. And now we have a balance of power, and it's going to be fascinating to watch John Boehner, the guy who was there in 1994, by the way, when he talks about cutting spending and cutting government and what have you. Republicans had that chance, and now he's back again, and I think the Tea Party crowd is really going to keep a close eye on what Republicans can do here, and now they're going to have to share in this power struggle with Barack Obama. It's not going to be all blame Democrats anymore.
And Jim, you talk about the balance of power. Talk about Ohio's power and influence really in politics in the United States. I mean, just think about that. John Boehner from our state might be the speaker. And you mentioned that there's a rumor that Rob Portman is very well could be considered to be the vice presidential candidate in 2 years. That's got to tell you how important Ohio is in politics.
Yeah, it always has been. Swing state, mother of presidents. We've had, 7 or 8 U.S. presidents come from the state of Ohio. John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, the first one in 70 years. Nicholas Longworth was the last speaker from the Cincinnati area, where John Boehner comes from, coincidentally enough. But Ohio plays a big role. It's got a lot of electoral votes. It's the 8th largest state in the nation. It's a swing state because even though Democrats have 1 million more registered voters, the fact is voters here look at themselves sort of, I think, as independents from the standpoint of give us an election cycle and we'll try to figure out which direction we want to go. We saw a big swing in this state 4 years ago when Democrats swept every statewide office with the exception of Mary Taylor and the auditor's race. There's a very good chance tonight, looking at these early numbers, that Republicans 4 years later in this election cycle might sweep everything as well. We'll just have to continue to watch that, but it goes to show that Ohio can never be taken for granted, that it's always going to be a battleground, and if you love politics, you feel like you're in the middle of it because both sides are always very competitive.
Jim, we are waiting to hear from Lee Fisher and Rob Portman as well. What types of things do you expect to hear from them in their respective concession and victory speeches?
Well, Lee Fisher, he's been around in the state politics for 20 years, and he's been on the ballot a whole bunch of times. This campaign never quite got off the ground, and it's got to be disappointing for Democrats. They had hoped that with George Voinovich retiring in a swing state where Democrats do have 1 million more registered voters, they had hoped that this might be a state where they would make Republicans play a little defense. At least that was the thinking at the beginning of the year. But I don't think we can underestimate how bruising that primary was back in May between Lee Fisher and Jennifer Brunner. She ended up with 45% of the vote. A lot of liberals, a lot of progressives supported her. They never got on the Fisher bandwagon. And so I think Fisher will probably, in a quick speech tonight, basically say, thank you, Ohio, and I'll be back. He certainly has been back in the past. I think we can expect to see him again. I think there was recognition with his lack of fundraising a few months ago that this was probably not going to be his year. Interestingly enough, guys, Lee Fisher he was never able to attach Rob Portman to the bad economy in the same way that Ted Strickland attached John Kasich to Wall Street and the Bush administration and Republicans who created this economy. It'd be interesting to think back on the strategy of the Fisher campaign and figure out where they went wrong there.
All right. Well, back to the governor's race very quickly. That is the tightest race of the night, surely. Our other statewide races, Jim, are not so tight. Let's look at the latest numbers there. For Attorney General, Mike DeWine, this is the only one that's really close, as a matter of fact. Mike DeWine, the Republican, trying to wrestle away that AG seat from Richard Cordray, the incumbent Democrat, 47% to 47% right now.
And guys,
keep a close eye on that one.
Both parties watching this very carefully because there are rumors that Cordray DeWine could be their party's nominee for governor if their party loses tonight. DeWine, of course, has been on the statewide stage for many, many years. Former U.S. Senator. He wants to make a political comeback. He's chosen Attorney General. Richard Cordray, by all accounts, is the Democratic Party's kind of shining star, the future. There's a lot of talk in Democratic circles that he could be the Democratic nominee if Ted Strickland fails tonight, if John Kasich wins. So there's a lot at stake in this race, and it is going down to the wire. It goes to show the lack of strength DeWine of getting conservatives back. Remember that he was very unpopular with conservatives in his re-election bid where he lost, and it doesn't look like he's got him back tonight.
And now we can see the Secretary of State's race, Jim. John Husted there with a 10 percentage point lead over Mary Ellen O'Shaughnessy. This would be another one of those statewide positions that the balance of power would shift.
Indeed. Jennifer Brunner obviously not running again. She ran for the Senate, had an unsuccessful primary there. Husted was expected to be the projected winner in this race coming into this final day of the campaign, and it looks like he indeed might hold on to that number.
Okay, moving on now to the race for treasurer. We now have the relative newcomer, Josh Mandel, leading incumbent Democrat Kevin Boyce 52% to 42%. That is with 28% of precincts reporting, kind of reflective of what is happening statewide.
Indeed, Mandel is kind of riding that wave, Jessa, and you got to remember this was a nasty race. This was a really ugly contest. Mandel put on probably the worst campaign ad, or the most negative campaign ad of the year, suggesting Boyce was a Muslim, which he is not. This has been personal. This has been bruising. Mandel is a state House member. He's not been around in Ohio politics for much time at all. He's 32 years old. Guys, he looks like what? He's just old enough to vote there, by all accounts, but he is 32. He could be influential in state politics because he's got a lot of time ahead of him, but certainly I don't think many people are proud of the campaign that's been waged for treasurer.
This campaign did get ugly pretty early, didn't it, Jim?
It did.
Also, you know, Kevin Boyce isn't too much older than him, just a couple years older than Josh Mandel. Race for auditor, Jim, David Yost from Delaware County against David Pepper from Hamilton County. There were a lot of people that said, you know, David Pepper had that Southwest Ohio support and was going to win this, but so far it's a tough go of it.
Interestingly enough, there were some Republicans who were suggesting they would sweep all the offices with the exception of auditor tonight, which would be a reversal from 4 years ago when Mary Taylor was the only Republican running for auditor who won. Pepper now has got to feel a little bit more comfortable. The strategy all along for that campaign was to do much better in Hamilton County than a lot of statewide Democrats traditionally do, and then roll into Cuyahoga County where he would roll over the Yost campaign. That number is closing now, 49-46%. It looks like Pepper is getting a bounce out of that southwestern part of the state into the central part of the state, and Yost, this could be interesting. It'll be interesting to see whether Yost hangs on.
And we just want to run through some of these races quickly for Supreme Court Justice. Right now we've got Judith Langzinger in the lead, 55% to Mary Jane Trapp's 45%. That is with 27% of the precincts reporting. And also in the race for Supreme Court Chief Justice, we've now got Maureen O'Connor at 66% of the votes to Eric Brown's 34%.
She was top
that
vote
is
getter.
For Supreme Court Chief Justice.
2 years ago, she was top vote getter in the state, so she's doing well again tonight.
And then certainly the memory of Thomas Moyer is on everybody's mind tonight, and certainly with all of those candidates, no matter what political party that they're affiliated with. Once again, we are standing by just minutes and or seconds away now from hearing from the candidates in the race for U.S. Senate. I believe that's Sherrod Brown speaking right now at the Democratic headquarters.
He's been busy. He's been doing a lot of campaigning.
Yeah, and you know, Lee Fisher is expected to come out and give a concession speech. It was a tough go of it for Lee Fisher, Jim. They actually, well, they say he gave some of his money back to the Democratic Party, but I don't know if it was his choice or not on that front, do you?
Well, his last $100,000 he decided to give back to the get out the vote effort for the state Democrats. I think the writing was on the wall. It must be a very interesting moment for Sherrod Brown, who wins his Senate race with much more ease, to kind of stand by and watch his colleague Lee Fisher, who he desperately want to serve with, sort of a team in Washington, have a Democratic counterpart, to watch that campaign just struggle all along. And you could tell that Brown was frustrated. Several times interviewed him over the summer into the fall, where he just basically came down to money. He said Rob Portman just has too much money in this campaign, and that money is probably going to be the difference. And indeed, Portman had no trouble tonight.
While we are waiting for Mr. Fisher, I want to get back to a point you made earlier, that very often in the early parts of this campaign, that we heard the Fisher campaign refer to Portman as Bush's right-hand man, but that just never stuck.
You know, Jess, and I don't know why. Again, you know, it seemed like the Strickland campaign had a much easier time in getting John Kasich attached to Wall Street and Lehman Brothers than Lee Fisher ever did in kind of painting Portman as part of the Bush team that created the economy that Democrats ran against in this particular election cycle. I think money has a lot to do with it. Look, when you're outspent 8-1, 9-1, I mean, the message is hard to get out there and have it stick. And that bruising primary, where basically Lee Fisher had to explain for months leading into the May primary of why he was a more legitimate candidate than Jennifer Brunner, who was basically suggesting that this situation tonight would be the case if she were not the nominee. I mean, Brunner's got to be thinking ahead to her political future, and I think the case she made that she would have been a more powerful nominee, whether we'll never know it or not, but I'm sure that that will be the argument of Brunner supporters, that the Democrats simply nominated the wrong person in this particular election cycle for Senate.
Jim, just looking at Sherrod Brown speaking to the crowd there at the Democratic headquarters in downtown Columbus, just thinking of his relationship with George Voinovich, which I know they didn't always agree, but it was one of respect, and I think for the most part, they got along. A lot of people did get along with George Voinovich, even Governor Ted Strickland. How do you suppose the relationship between Sherrod Brown now and Rob Portman might be?
I think it's going to be very good. You know, Portman pointed out during the campaign that he got along with Bill Clinton, that he had a lot of legislation that was signed into law by Bill Clinton. Look, Rob Portman, by all accounts, he's not one of these Tea Party Republicans. He's not part of the right wing. He is very conservative, points out he has a conservative record, but Portman is always the guy that suggests that he prefers a big round table in his office that includes every point of view rather than a narrow table that just has a certain political ideology. So by all accounts, and conservatives are not going to like me saying this, but the fact is Portman probably will be a more middle-of-the-road Republican, particularly in these days when you see some of these more conservative Tea Party Republicans being elected. We talked about it at the very beginning of our broadcast tonight, the fact that Strickland would take an early lead due to absentee votes, and then Kasich, over a gradual period of time, over a couple hours, would take the lead as those southwestern Republican votes and those rural Republican votes came in, and then central Ohio. That's exactly what's happened. The question is going to, as we've been saying all night long, come down to whether Ted Strickland has enough votes in Cuyahoga County to catch up. I want to bring State Senator Kevin Coughlin into the discussion right now as we kind of look. And Eve, if you can, if we can turn our attention to the House races, there is a developing headline of the hour. We've been talking for months about that Republican wave. We are seeing it. It is a tidal wave, in fact, here in the state of Ohio. If we can, Eve, if you've got District 18, let's start there. 77% of the precincts reporting. Look at this. Bob Gibbs, 55% of the vote over incumbent Democrat Zach Space. That's 77% of the vote in. Can't call it yet, but this is an indication of just how big potentially this Republican wave will be in the state of Ohio. If we go a little bit south to District 6, Bill Johnson. And this leads to the question that Senator Coughlin just asked, who is Bill Johnson? I mean, at the end of the night, he is leading now with 68% of the precincts in. He is defeating longtime incumbent Charlie Wilson. Again, Bill Johnson kind of coming out of nowhere, an indication of this wave that we've all been speculating about. Over in District 1, Steve Dreyhouse losing at this hour, only 22% of the precincts reporting. But former Congressman Shabbat doing well. He's had a lead the entire evening. Depending on where those precincts are at, that lead could even expand, and some might expect it to. And then we've got District 12 in central Ohio, where Pat Tiberi was supposedly going to be in a little bit of trouble. He's having difficulty tonight. Votes from Delaware County are beginning to come in, but it looks like he might potentially hold on against Paula Brooks, very popular local elected official. And then there's one other district, Eve, help me out here. Is it District 16?
Right.
Right. John Bocherry losing badly, half the vote in, Congressman Bocherry losing to Renacci there. And so the state is going red. Look at that state, and you compare it to just 2 years ago, and there are several congressional districts here that look like, at least at this hour with the votes that we have in, that's 2 years ago. Now flip it again, this is tonight. And if those numbers hold, that proves this Republican wave that has been talked about, Kevin, for months, has become a reality. What is it? Is it just anger at Obama? Is it anger at government? What turns that from blue to red in 24 months?
I think it's two things. I think there's a lot of disillusionment with Barack Obama, a lot of independents, of course, progressives in his base, and a lot of business people who supported him in the last presidential election have now been disappointed, and they're staying at home. They're not enthused about coming out to vote. He could turn those around for sure within 24 months, but for this election, they're definitely sending a message. Couple that with, and love him or hate him, you have to give credit to the Tea Party movement for defining the talking points of this election, by addressing government spending, overregulation, the scope of government in personal lives and businesses. That has become the talking point of this election, and it's really because of that movement, and there's no question that they have fueled the wave that's coming across Ohio now.
Oh, okay, so John Boehner becomes Speaker of the House. What does he do with the Tea Party? Because the fact is, Republicans controlled Washington completely 5 years ago. People forget that. President Bush had a Republican House, Republican Senate. Deficits did not go down, they went up. Spending did not go down, it went up. So Republicans had their shot recently. They certainly did back in 1994 when we saw another big Republican wave. I mean, what has to be done? Are we talking massive cuts? What does the Tea Party expect here, and what do angry independents expect for the Republican House?
I think that could cause more of a concern in the United States Senate. Should Republicans take over control of the United States Senate, there's going to be a significant block, potentially 5 or 6 what we would call Tea Party candidates in there. And that's a significant block when you look at the rules and what it takes to stop legislation or hold things up in the Senate. I think what you're going to see is this. I think President Obama is probably going to come out within the next couple of weeks and suggest that all the legislative leadership come together in a summit and talk about how they can work in a bipartisan way going forward to show some results and address these issues that people are concerned about. My guess is that's not going to go very far.
Let me ask you, we're going to show this right here. This is breaking news at this hour. A lot of people thought that this might happen, but Zach Space was a very moderate Democrat. He voted against the Obama health care plan. He had the endorsement of the gun lobby. We can now project officially Bob Gibbs the winner in District 18. Surprised?
I am surprised.
You serve with Bob.
Bob is a colleague of mine in the Ohio Senate. He's a wonderful man. He's a quality candidate, and he deserves to win this election. The big issue is that is coal country. That district is Ohio's coal country, and Zach Space voted for cap and trade. Simple as that.
And at the end of the night, I mean, that he could never get away from that.
That's right.
Even with the anti-health care vote. Kind of interesting. All right, guys, we'll send it back to you. But that is we talk for so long about this wave, this expected wave, this pendulum swing in American politics. It's always interesting on election night to see it actually come true, and that's exactly what's happening nationally, and you can see it right here in Ohio. Republicans are the beneficiary this year of anger at Washington and anger at this president.
Okay, amazing what is happening tonight. As you predicted, I should mention, it must feel good to be right, Jim.
As far as our House and Senate races within the state go, it's also a good night for Republicans on that front. In fact, Armand Budish, the Democrat, has called Bill Batchelder to concede, and Bill Batchelder will be the new Speaker of the House in Ohio. Both the House and Senate here in Ohio, Jim, have gone red. Is that right?
Yep.
And if Kasich ends up winning this close battle, it would be an all-Republican House
sweep.
Clean sweep.
We can't underestimate how huge this is. I mean, when you talk about a Republican night, it's red. Ohio's red in 2010. This is a statement that the current House Speaker, Armand Budish, has put out just in the last few minutes. He says, basically blames the national recession for creating a bad economy in the state of Ohio. He's called Bill Batchelder, who will be the new Republican Speaker of the House beginning in January. So you now, for sure, in Ohio, we have a Republican state Senate and a Republican House. That is big news, particularly looking at that $8 billion potential budget shortfall next year. And if you get a Governor Kasich, you'll have all Republican control. It looks like they could potentially sweep these statewide offices. They have already taken control of the state House. They have the state Senate. We've looked at these congressional districts as the blue has gone red. A lot of these Democratic incumbents, we kind of knew that Driehaus and Kilroy were sort of the front line of that wave. Now it's swept right past that into Zach Space's district, Charlie Wilson's district. I mean, this is a big blowout night for Republicans.
Guess we could sum this night up in one word, just red.
Red.
And what's interesting, though, we've talked about this too all night, is 4 years ago, Ken Blackwell only won 16 of the 88 counties. So it was virtually a flipped map. You saw a sea of blue 4 years ago.
Actually, can you go to
that? In fact,
that?
I've got that map. I was just going to flip that up. Here it is. This is 4 years ago. You can see just a sea of blue here with just, again, 16 counties going to Republican.
And tonight, John Kasich.
Ken Blackwell. And tonight, here it is now. John Kasich is amazing. He has flipped so many of these counties his way, and it's kind of unbelievable, I think.
It is. But what this tells us is that Strickland is likely to close this gap, this 85,000 vote margin, with votes that are still going to come in from Cuyahoga County. Guys, we are going to be down to a very close race. All the public opinion polls for the last few weeks have been showing this race within 2-3 percentage points, and it looks like that's about what it's going to result in tonight. The Strickland campaign, as I mentioned earlier tonight, had hoped all along that they could prevent Kasich from cracking that 48% of the vote. They were depending on the Libertarian candidate in particular to try to slow Kasich's momentum down. I think there was a feeling that if Kasich hit that 50%, that Strickland would be behind that, and seemingly that's exactly what's happening. This is a vote game now. The state has gone red, but it's still very competitive. But at the end of the night, 111,000 vote lead for John Kasich. The question becomes, where are the votes left? And if there just aren't enough of them to catch up, it can't be done.
And you've got to give credit to Kasich. I mean, he did a good job. He hit the pavement. We said all along going into today, it's a matter of who can get out the vote, and it looks like perhaps the Republican wave is true here in Ohio, and that Republicans were more enthusiastic perhaps to go to the polls.
I thought it was very interesting at the early part of the night when we interviewed Sam Gresham, the head of Common Cause, a longtime Democratic activist who said the Cuyahoga County may have failed us here. There was a big labor get out the vote effort this year. President Obama making numerous trips, including his last campaign rally of the year. The Strickland camp felt all along that Obama could help motivate that base in Cuyahoga County and Cleveland and get out that vote. But they also knew they were running the risk, guys, of independents just being upset. Every poll shows independent voters are just not liking what's happening in Washington, and they're not big fans of President Obama right now. That was a double-edged sword, and at the end of tonight, when you look at all the reasons why one side won and one side lost, I think the Democrats will look back to the appearances of President Obama and try to figure out whether that was whether that motivated the base enough or it completely ruined their chances with independents.
That's
whether
right.
the more than dozen visits that Obama made actually did more damage than good for the Strickland campaign.
And particularly the recent ones where his job approval rating was going down.
That is with 91% of the precincts reporting, and Jim Heath with his calculator out at this hour trying to figure out if it's statistically possible, vote for vote, if Ted Strickland could win this race.
You guys always make fun of me. I always use the very expensive latest tools.
You're
the
very
Sharpie
high-tech.
Right, the Sharpie and the pad. But about 126,000 vote margin in the governor's race. It just looks like Ted Strickland is going to run out of counties here, and he's going to run out of votes. Cuyahoga County does not have enough votes left, even if he carried all of them at this point. This could mean a clean sweep for Republicans in the state of Ohio. Eve, if we can, let's go to the congressional map first, just to compare what's happened in the last couple of years. This is what's happening tonight. We're seeing that Republican wave. We've been talking about it for weeks. The Democrats always said that it was not real, that independents would end up breaking their way, or at least they'd break even. They had 1 million more voters, registered voters in the state of Ohio. They thought they could have a firewall, but that is not a firewall. That is a very red Republican Ohio tonight. Just compare it to a couple years ago.
Yeah, Jim, take a look 2 years ago. This is the picture. There were 10 Democratic districts that were won 2 years ago. Now we are back to Republican wave. So the Republicans gain 5 seats in the U.S. House tonight. Big story.
And it is a big story because what's really important about that is we have reapportionment coming up. Ohio's likely to lose because of our population decline. We're likely to lose 2 congressional seats the next go around in the census. That means 2 of these 18 congressional seats are going to go away, and Republicans are going to have by far the majority when they fight that fight to see who's going to control the legislative lines and congressional lines in the state. If we can, the governor's race very quickly. Can we go to 2006, Eve?
Yeah, we can go to 2006 right here.
We'll just show you. This is the situation 4 years ago that Ted Strickland enjoyed. He got 61% of the statewide vote against very weak Republican challenger Ken Blackwell. But we talked about at the beginning of the night how John Kasich was going to try to paint this state red, and this is where we're at this hour now. With 91% of the precincts in, the Kasich campaign has been very successful of doing what they needed to do, which the rural part of the state, the southwestern part of the state into Franklin County. Kasich told me a couple days ago, guys, that he thought he would carry Franklin. He is not going to do that, but it looks like he'll put together just enough votes minus Franklin County, which he represented in Congress. And Eve, as you pointed out, surrounding areas of Franklin
Look at that.
have gone Republican, and a lot of folks who used to live in Franklin County, frankly, have moved to some of these suburbs in Outline County. And I had 2 undecided voters who have been undecided pretty much throughout the duration of this campaign who are from Dayton, who I thought were really in the final days leaning towards voting for Governor Strickland. And I spoke to them earlier this week, and they said they had both voted for John Kasich. And you know the reason they gave had nothing to do with the state of Ohio or the politics here. They said they wanted to send Barack Obama and the president a message. And so through their votes for John Kasich, they felt that they were sending a message to Washington and President Obama. So guys, you know, there might be a lot of different reasons why the governor, even though nobody argues that he's not personally popular, there are all kinds of factors just working against him this year. Let's go to Stephanie Menike, as a matter of fact, who is at Republican headquarters. I imagine a lot of smiles there tonight, Steph.
Oh, absolutely, Jim. And I'm here with a man who has a very big smile on his face, Steve Stiver, the winner of the 15th district, who beat Democrat incumbent Mary Jo Kilroy. First, congratulations on your win this evening. I want to ask you, first and foremost, everybody is seeing a sea of red. And of course, people were optimistic here at the Republican headquarters, but did you ever see this coming?
Well, you know, after 2 years ago, I did not see this coming exactly, but I knew if I worked, I'd have a chance to win, and if I listened to the voters, I'd have a chance to win, and that's really what I did, is listen to the voters, work with the voters, reach out, talk to people, bring them my message of less spending and focusing on jobs, and I think that paid off.
Mr. Stivers, what does a new Republican Congress mean for the state of Ohio?
Well, I hope it means more certainty for business so we can get focused on having business create jobs again. I also think it means reducing spending so that we don't burden our kids with the spending from today.
Oh, Jim, well, we will continue to follow this governor's race, and with 95% of the precincts reporting, I think it's important to let our viewers know the reason they haven't called this race quite yet is because of that crucial Cuyahoga County vote total, right?
Yeah, indeed. As a matter of fact, and Eve can kind of double check my math here, but I've got about 115,000 vote lead there. With Kasich over Strickland, and only about 50,000 votes remaining, potential votes remaining in Cuyahoga County. There just aren't enough.
You're right, Jim, and I've got it up there. Cuyahoga County looks like has about 360,000 votes so far, and we estimate about 410.
Right. The elections director said late today that it was probably going to be around top off at around 410,000.
Though recently, Jim, we're getting a statement from the Strickland campaign saying, in effect, the bar's open. They're saying that given the significant number of votes not counted in the governor's race, they're continuing to watch the results closely, so not conceding this race even as the number of precincts continue to close in on the campaign, and still a 4% spread.
I mean, after the campaign that they've waged and the battle they've waged, I mean, the governor has every right to wait till every single last vote is counted. This has been very close, particularly in the final weeks. The governor had a strategy for victory, hoped that he could keep John Kasich below that 50% number, hoping the Libertarian candidate would kind of dilute some of the strength of John Kasich. Interestingly enough, the Kasich campaign was not as strong in Hamilton County. They are very strong in the rest of southwestern Ohio tonight, kind of accomplished their goal there, and you can see behind Eve, I mean, the state has gone red. This is a huge improvement for the Republican candidate over 4 years ago, and it looks like it just might be enough, even without Franklin County, Eve.
I know, that's really interesting because I expected there to be a much bigger spread in Franklin County. Ted Strickland has 52% of the vote to John Kasich's 45%. But then, as we've talked about in Central Ohio, all around Franklin County is a sea of red. So very interesting numbers. And, you know, we say it every year, and it does sound cliche, and I don't like cliches, but every vote really does count. And this is a case in point where it's absolutely true. This race could come down to really, in the grand scheme of things, you know, a very small number of votes.
This is a gigantic moment. Ohio's John Boehner is on the verge of becoming the Speaker of the House, the first one from Ohio in 70 years, not since Nicholas Longworth back in 1939. John Boehner speaking live from Washington, D.C.
But make no mistake, the President will find in our new majority the voice of the American people as they've expressed it tonight.
You got to give Republicans their due tonight. This is very, very impressive. This is a sweeping landslide for a party that was pronounced almost dead 2 years ago. Barack Obama came in a wave of enthusiasm with all the expectations of the world, and 24 months later, these Republicans had managed to put together, and some would argue that it was a just say no campaign, but whatever it was, they have come roaring back, and that has placed John Boehner from Cincinnati. The last Speaker of the House from Ohio, coincidentally enough, was also from the Cincinnati area. But this is an impressive gain of Republicans, and it puts John Boehner in the Speaker's chair, guys, next January. The most fascinating thing about all of this was only 5 years ago when Republicans had control of Washington with President Bush, with the House, with the Senate. During those times, we saw spending go up, we saw deficits rise. So Republicans, this has not been 40 years. Remember in 1994, on that election night, we sat here, and that was all about the fact that Republicans had not been in power for 4 decades. Very different scenario this time around. Independents, for instance, say that they were very, very angry at Democrats, but they don't trust Republicans. Different than 1994 when they trusted Republicans to actually cut government.
And Jim, I thought that was a very emotional speech. Many
so.
people that don't get a chance to hear him speak much might not realize that, you know, he cries once in a while in his speeches, and that, you know, has come under criticism for that. He was saying that he's chased the American dream his whole life, then kind of broke down there. It almost seems like this was an acceptance speech for the Speaker, didn't it?
It did, absolutely. He is emotional. Sometimes he gets criticism from fellow Republicans because he'll get emotional at any given moment. What's fascinating, John Boehner dropped out of Republican leadership. He was forced out of Republican leadership in the 1990s when John Kasich, coincidentally enough, was in Congress. So Boehner has seen it all. He's been in and out of Republican leadership. He just happened to kind of get to the right spot at the right time. But for all the criticisms about Boehner, there's a lot about his tan and about he spends a lot of time on the golf course, and there's a lot of kind of ridicule. The fact is nobody has campaigned more for Republican candidates across the country than John Boehner. There were a lot of IOUs, and that will probably solidify him. Even with these younger Tea Party Republicans who are kind of flooding in now, he'll probably be able to herd cats, if you will, and get everybody on the same page and have no trouble winning, even if he's opposed by a Tea Party newbie in Congress. Very impressive turnaround for John Boehner, both his political career and if you look at his congressional career just in the last couple of years.
Jim, do you think that now that it appears that the Republicans will take the House, Democrats will maintain control of the U.S. Senate and, of course, the White House, is that inevitable gridlock, or is this a chance to finally say, okay, now you do something, let's work together, trying to shed that image of the party of no, as Democrats tried to paint Republicans recently?
I don't know for sure, but if I'm in the White House tonight, if I'm President Obama, privately there might be a little bit of a smile. That sounds interesting when your political party loses power, but the fact is, you look back to 1994, when Bill Clinton had to have a press conference the day after Republicans came sweeping into power, taking control of the House for the first time in decades. Clinton had a press conference where he declared that he was still relevant in the process. Then Republicans made a series of mistakes, including shutting down the government in 1995, and Bill Clinton had an easy re-election in 1996. The Obama White House knows now that Republicans, they've had their night, and now Republicans are going to have to deliver. And what's fascinating here is that this could be a case of establishment Republicans like Boehner versus this new crop of Republicans, the Tea Partiers, who are going to want the world quickly. And as we know in politics and in Washington, you can't get things done very quickly. And so this, in a weird way, we'll know in 24 months, but in a strange way, sharing power now and sharing responsibility could be the best thing that's happened to President Obama. And, well, guys, I'll give you the honors. Did you hear that news? The Associated Press has called it. John Kasich is the governor-elect of the state of Ohio. We said that that was the trend, and it looks like he's going to hold off, he's going to be able to hold off that Cuyahoga County vote. So there it is. You know, earlier today when I jokingly said this could all be wrapped up by midnight, I didn't really think that that was ever possible. The Republicans
didn't think it would be that close,
right?
Jim.
Yeah, I mean,
5 minutes.
Here it is. I mean, we are on the, we're approaching midnight. Republicans have just run the table. They have just literally run the table in the state of Ohio. John Kasich, the governor-elect of the state of Ohio, he said that he would turn this state red. He has done that. And Governor Strickland, it's a valiant effort in this very bad economy, but it was just not enough. So there it is. You know, earlier today when I jokingly said this could all be wrapped up by midnight, I didn't really think that that was ever possible. The Republicans
didn't think it would be that close,
right?
Jim.
Yeah, I mean,
5 minutes.
Here it is. I mean, we are on the, we're approaching midnight. Republicans have just run the table. They have just literally run the table in the state of Ohio. John Kasich, the governor-elect of the state of Ohio, he said obviously a lot of anger in the state, in the nation. Anger directed at Washington, angered at the president, but Republicans have had a clean sweep, and I imagine Kevin DeWine and the Republican Party will be patting themselves on the back for a very impressive run of candidates. Their slate wins.
Jim, I have a question for you. I'd like you to take off your reporter hat for a second, because I know you've worked some political campaigns before.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, Stephanie there, I mean, there's a lot of energy in the room, everyone wanting to hear from John Kasich, but certain protocols have to happen. There are certain niceties. Phone calls are usually made from one candidate to another, either making a concession of some kind or another. You know, so what is happening right now behind the scenes?
Well, it's painful. And particularly in a close race like this, particularly an incumbent governor. You know, not since 1974 has the state of Ohio witnessed this, where an incumbent governor goes down to defeat. By all accounts, Ted Strickland is personally popular. Republican lawmakers like him. Republican leadership likes him. It was never an issue of disliking the governor. And now he's in the position where he's going to, as he has in the past, he's lost political contests before, but now he has to make the proverbial phone call and wish John Kasich well. One thing about Ted Strickland, what I expect him probably to say in the next few minutes as he concedes this race, is that he loves Ohio. He was born here, he was raised here, he's not going anywhere. I did a little checking earlier today to see exactly what happens to Ted Strickland in a post-governorship, and it's very likely that President Obama is going to remember how loyal he was. I mean, the president came back in this state, some would argue maybe more for Barack Obama than Ted Strickland, because if you looked at the numbers with independents, it confused a lot of us of exactly how the president's visits were helping in this environment when his approval rating was 38%. So in many ways, perhaps Ted Strickland will receive, and I'm just speculating here, an ambassadorship or some kind of position for the loyalty to the president that he showed in this campaign this particular year.
Well, as we look at the final numbers there, one thing that strikes me, you know, we heard so much about the polls over the past 6 months and beyond, really. I'm thinking about the Ohio poll, which was just released on Friday, Jim, and that is so right on a lot of the time, and these numbers are actually changed now. The updated ones are 50% for Kasich and 47%. And you remember the Ohio poll had Ted Strickland at 47.7%. And that's from the University of Cincinnati, the Institute of Policy Research there. And they pride themselves on predicting these not only presidential elections, but these Senate races and governor races. So that one was kind of hit the mark, didn't it?
Right, it did. And you know what's amazing? If you look back, Ted Strickland never got above that 47%. In all of those polls, he was within 2 or 3 points, but he was never above 45, 47%. He never cracked 50 to the point where the governor told me just a few days ago that he felt he could win this race with 48%. And guys, I've been around politics most of my life to know that when somebody tells you they can win a race with 48% of the vote and not 50, that's a pretty good indication that everything has to go their way, that the dominoes have to fall perfectly to have some kind of winning strategy. And that whole thought that the Libertarian candidate would deflect some votes from John Kasich just didn't hold up.
And as we very well all know now, all those dominoes turned red tonight in Ohio, didn't they, Jim?
Yeah, they did. And Jesse, let me just quickly answer the other half of that question that you asked me. Very excited in the Kasich camp. Obviously, they now think that they can go conquer the world. It's a great feeling when you win, and I imagine the Kasich campaign is going to enjoy that after this hard-fought battle. All
right. Let's turn things over to Eve Mueller. She's got our newest technology, the vote tracker over there, where we're seeing every vote by vote. So just a reminder that your vote does count. Eve, kind of show us the latest there, what you're looking at.
Well, I'm looking at the U.S. House races, and again, we've talked about this red wave. And if you take a look at the vote tracker, this is tonight. It looks like Democrats are going to keep 5 districts in Ohio. But look at what it was 2 years ago. They had 10. So Republicans have gained 5 seats in the U.S. House tonight. Kind of an incredible story, which goes along with the Republican wave. Here's the governor's race tonight. And look at all the red there. Not a lot of blue. It was a very different picture 4 years ago. I'll show you the map. So a picture tells 1,000 words. And again, tonight.
And Eve, we talked about for this last week about that crash of red. Now, we thought that would come in the rural areas in the northwest part of Ohio there, Van Wert County and the Lima area. And we expected that red to change from 4 years ago. But look how impressively deep that is across the state of Ohio, even up to the northeastern part of the state, down into Ted Strickland's home turf there in the southeastern part, a few counties that John Kasich is carrying. So, I mean, this is an impressive turnaround. And Franklin County, at the end of the day, I think the governor's team will be surprised that he didn't do a little bit better. He carried central Ohio, and Franklin County was 65% of the vote 4 years ago. He is carrying it just by a bare majority, 52% now. They'll look at the middle part of the state and wonder kind of what went wrong. I imagine when they look at these numbers and just how close he got. Guys, keep in mind, this is a Democratic incumbent governor in the Midwest in a bad economy, and Ted Strickland almost pulled it off. I think that's kudos to him as a candidate and his campaign team for being able to get that Wall Street label early on John Kasich and almost being able to win in this bad economy.
You've got to give him a lot of credit. And that new poll here in Ohio that showed President Obama had up to a 60% disapproval rating just in Ohio.
Right.
That's in Ohio.
That's hard to overcome.
Nationwide, he had about a 45% approval rating. So you're up against this wave of, I'm going to go with the other guys and take a chance on them and see what they do.
Right.
And certainly we haven't seen the last of the Democrats. You know how quickly things can change. And,
I can hardly wait to hear the spin.
Ted Strickland is 70 years old now, but he's a young 70, and I don't think we maybe have seen the last of him.
Certainly not.
You know, you get people like Mike DeWine, who's right back into the picture now, and just wait a couple years and things will change. In the way the climate is these days, people have lost their patience or are very impatient when it comes to politics.
Look, Mike, and I don't want to jump ahead too far here, but it would only make sense. We've seen how many times President Obama has come to the state. We know how important Ohio is to President Obama, the fact that he'd like to carry the Buckeye State again. What do you do to do that? Well, if you don't have Ted Strickland in place as governor, perhaps you appoint him to a position where he can still be relevant and still keep you in touch with Ohio. 2 years from now, we're just 24 months away from Barack Obama's re-election bid and election night 2012. So it would surprise me if they don't enlist the help of Ted Strickland, the administration doesn't enlist his help in some way very, very quickly.
Because, as we mentioned, he is very popular, so it certainly could help his campaign for 20
to 46% is the vote total right now. One of the more closer races. Really.
I was just going to point that out. That's probably our closest statewide race of the evening, is it not, Jim?
It is. It's close. I mean, obviously, Kasich Strickland is still very close, but DeWine, that's an impressive comeback. Look, he was facing Rich Cordray, who held the position, by all accounts, an up-and-comer in the Democratic Party. He's not going anywhere. He could very well make a run for governor in 4 years against an incumbent Governor Kasich or another Republican nominee. But this is a major blow to the Democratic Party. There's no question about it. They thought they had firewalls up. They thought that Strickland was a firewall, that Cordray would be. Perhaps David Pepper, who represented Hamilton County in the southwestern part of the state, that he could hold on for auditor. Didn't happen. The Republican wave is simply too great. And Mike DeWine, who did not enjoy the support of Tea Party Republicans and more conservative Republicans, they call him a rhino, a Republican name only. They were never very supportive of him. Remember, Cordray got the pro-gun vote, the pro-gun lobby. But nonetheless, Mike DeWine, with this Republican wave, guys, has ridden back into public life, and from a U.S. Senator, defeated U.S. Senator, to now the Attorney General-elect of the state of Ohio.
When he was just making a speech and he said, "It's good to be here," you believe him?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, of all those Democratic candidates that we've highlighted tonight, I think Rich Cordray was one of the more well-liked ones, and one of the ones that a lot of the pundits said that would probably had a good chance, at least, of holding on to his position. So, Jim, I think Mike DeWine might have benefited from that very poor Democrat voter turnout.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the end, that's what it's going to come down to, and he benefited from the enthusiasm, particularly of independents. I think that we'll see in the data coming up. Republicans got out the vote, independents jumped on board, and they helped some of the weaker Republican candidates like Mike DeWine, who, as I said, did not enjoy sort of right-wing Tea Party support Remember, Dave Yost, who won tonight for auditor, was actually in the primary race against Mike DeWine before Kevin DeWine got involved, and the state Republican Party convinced Yost to get out of the Attorney General primary into the auditor's race. Looked like that worked out for everybody tonight, both of them, both DeWine and Yost winning. Yost having no problem, 45%. Again, Pepper was expected to perform a little bit better because he comes from a Republican area of the state. The thought being that he could do better in Cincinnati and kind of pick up votes in Cuyahoga County. But guys, at the end of the night, this is just a Republican year. Independents are upset. They're blaming the party in charge, and that's the Democrats. And it's not rocket science. It just happens in some election cycles. And this year, I think the headline is red for Ohio.
It really is amazing if you look at all the different positions. State Auditor, Treasurer, Attorney General, Secretary of State, all Republican. The House and the Senate here in the state, Republican. The Governor now Republican. And, of course, the Ohio Supreme Court, basically,
all
of
Republican.
the Republican persuasion.
Right.
That's, I don't know if that's ever happened in the state. We'll have to look at the history books, but that's quite impressive.
Yeah, it is quite impressive, particularly 2 years ago, Ohio went for Barack Obama. It was a blue state 2 years ago. It was part of the Obama strategy to win 270 electoral votes, which he easily did with Ohio's help. It's going to be very difficult for the president to come back in here, particularly with John Kasich at the helm and with the organization that the state Republican Party can now build through all of these various winners, all of them serving in elected office. It's going to be very difficult for the Obama team to come in here and try to challenge that. But the state Democratic Party, they gained strength 2 years ago. They were strong tonight. They kept the governor in a bad economy, very competitive. Democrats are not going away in this state, but certainly hats off to Republicans tonight. They came back in full force after that beating they took 4 years ago and 2 years ago.
John Kasich will become the new governor of the state of Ohio. We will hear from him next. John Kasich is the final party to be heard from. A victory speech, and we've seen a number of Republican victory speeches tonight, Jim, and this should top them all.
Yeah, it should. It is a big night for Republicans, devastating for state Democrats. I mean, basically one concession speech after another when you see Rich Cordray concede defeat and lead into Governor Ted Strickland, who by all accounts was very personally popular. A lot of voters saying they wish both of these candidates could have won. I think that's reflected in the closeness of this election tonight. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of anger. A lot of Ohioans directed their anger towards Washington by voting Republican for these statewide offices and for their legislative candidates. And it is a clean sweep for Republicans in this state. It's a very good night for red and very good night for the Kasich team, which had to repair a Republican Party in this state that only saw Ken Blackwell get 30-some% of the vote 4 years ago. Keep in mind, Ted Strickland this time 4 years ago was declaring victory with a 61% win. That was quite a turnaround for both parties. These numbers very, very close, guys.
I don't think it's been quite a number of years, if ever, that Ted Strickland has been unemployed, politically unemployed, I should say. He came right from representing Ohio's 6th district to winning that governor's race, and now as the 2011 approaches, he will have to figure out something to do. Certainly, he will be involved in politics in some way, I would think. Don't you think, Jim?
I would think so. I mean, he doesn't appear 70. He's very energetic. He likes politics. Again, he's very personal, very personally popular. He's very good with the press. He's been probably the most accessible politician that I've seen in my political career. That can be a double-edged sword when you open up as much as he did to the press, even in bad political times, Troopergate and some other times when he was having problems with his agency directors. He was always available to answer questions. I would suspect that the Obama administration will probably be giving him a ring to see what he wants to do. I think he's sincere in saying that that would be this was his last political campaign, but it would probably behoove a President Obama who's looking at Ohio, trying to find some inroads here, knowing that this year was not a very good inroad at all, that perhaps there might be some role for Ted Strickland to play in the administration that will allow him to keep contacts here in the state of Ohio. What we've learned through all of this, we're all old enough to know, is that this pendulum swings, and now it seems to be swinging more wildly than ever and more quickly than ever. I mean, my goodness, just 2 years ago, Barack Obama carried the state of Ohio. It was a blue state. There was success across the board. 4 years ago, Democrats almost did what Republicans did tonight, sweeping all the statewide offices with the exception of auditor. So this pendulum swings, and I think the message to Ted Strickland tonight is simply the bad economy. It's time for a change. We simply think that we need something new to get us out of this bad economy.
Okay, Jim, thank you for that analysis. We are going to take a quick break. We are monitoring Republican headquarters. We will have the latest for you when we come back.
Large margin, though, 49% to 47%. Still a few votes out there to count, but we can safely say that John Kasich will be the next governor of the state of Ohio. A clean sweep tonight for Republicans, not only in the congressional district races, they did very well, but also in those statewide races, Attorney General, Secretary of State, Treasurer, Auditor, and then there's the House and Senate, which John Kasich now has the luxury of working with his own party. So in a sense, Jim Heath, there are no excuses. He's going to be held to a high standard.
Yeah, I mean, now the process of governing begins, and this is going to be complete governing for Republicans, and there are going to have to be economic improvements, or the electorate is going to do the same thing 4 years from now, what they did tonight. I think we're all wondering what the headline of the Dispatch is going to be in the morning. There are several suggestions. You could have sweep, you could have red, a variety of takes on the Republican victory tonight. Do we have that? Are we going to go do we have our interview with the Columbus Dispatch? Because I think we're all, Jessica, you actually asked about this much earlier in the evening. Exactly, I guess we're just a minute away. Sorry about that.
Waiting for that headline. Well, actually, I want to bring up a good point. This is just crossing the AP wire, Jim.
Right.
I think you'll find this interesting. Incoming House Speaker John Boehner saying tonight that President Barack Obama called with congratulations for winning control of the House. Boehner described it as a brief but pleasant midnight conversation, saying the two discussed working together on priorities for Americans. Boehner says he told the president that people expect them to cut spending and create jobs. That's been much the rhetoric during this campaign.
And we'll let you comment on that in just a second, Jim. First, let's look at the numbers for Attorney General Mike DeWine, the next AG in Ohio, 48 to 46% over Richard Cordray, who will now leave that office. Want to go back down to the Republican headquarters, where the last guy to speak is the new governor, John Kasich. We're waiting for him. Stephanie Menike is there right in the middle of the party. Steph, any idea when he might come out?
Well, we just got word from the party chair it's going to be at least another 10 minutes. So this party isn't going anywhere. These people are going to stick around to wait to hear from the next governor of Ohio. But just like you mentioned, I'm here with Mike DeWine, the new winner for Attorney General, again beating an incumbent Democrat. First, congratulations on your win this evening. You are no stranger to the political world. Did you ever foresee a win like Ohio saw tonight in the Republican Party?
Not really. You know, I've seen it go the other way not too long ago. So, but I think people really want change, and now it's really incumbent upon us, those of us who won, to go make those changes. And you know, people are not going to be very tolerant of us unless we move very quickly.
And not only has the state of Ohio seen a big change, the entire nation has had their eyes on Ohio. What does this mean for the country as they see Ohio turn red in a matter of a couple hours?
Well, Ohio is a key state, and of course it's a pivotal state in the presidential campaign. So I'm sure everyone's eyes now are going to look towards 2 years from now and say, well, where's Ohio going to go then?
Stephanie, you're too young to remember a famous movie called The Candidate starring Robert Redford, but it's a campaign where he's an underdog throughout the race and ends up winning. His last line in the movie, he looks at his campaign advisor and says, what next? What do we do now? And that might be what a lot of Republicans are saying tonight, now that they control everything in state government. Ben Marison, the editor of the Columbus Dispatch, joins us. We were talking, Ben, just a few minutes ago about the headline on the Dispatch front page, sweep, red. Do you want our suggestions, or do you already have one?
Well, suggestions are always welcome, but we have one on the page, and it's Kasich and the GOP role. They had, we weren't sure what it was going to be for a while. It was an up and down night, and we couldn't figure out where it was going to end up, just like you guys, and we finally got some firm numbers, and now we'll see if they hold up.
Ben, are you surprised? I mean, this is just a complete slaughter here in political terms. I mean, the Republican Party they've run the table. They've gotten every statewide office. They now take, in addition to the state Senate, they have the House. They're going to have a governor at the helm as they deal with this potential $8 billion deficit problem next year. I mean, this is an impressive showing tonight, but now Republicans are going to be under enormous pressure to deliver something.
Well, it's going to be really interesting to watch, because now the Republicans won't have anybody to blame, first of all. Second, John Kasich, as governor, is going to have to put forward a budget without tax increases, with some cuts that he may have difficulty getting through his own party. So the question will be, how does he manage to get the changes he needs through the legislature that's only controlled by Republicans starting early next year?
Right, and there's a lot of speculation already. A lot of those Republican lawmakers are saying privately that they want the governor to get started on a budget right away, that they want that budget maybe as early as January so they can let the chips fall where they may, because that budget's probably going to include a lot of cuts, maybe some education cuts, among other things, privatization of state government. And there's one thing I think that is certain: John Kasich is not going to go to President Obama and ask for more federal money for the state of Ohio.
Well, if you know John Kasich, and I'm sure you know him fairly well, he's not going to need any encouragement to move quickly. He will. He may not even go to sleep tonight. He may get busy looking at budget numbers to get a handle on what's ahead of him. But you know, John Kasich has had to deal with tough budgets in the past. I don't know that he's dealt with one as tough as what he's going to be facing now, given that he doesn't want one-time federal money. He doesn't want to raise taxes, and people aren't really going to want all the cuts that may have to come their way. So it's going to be an interesting budget cycle, interesting couple of years, and an interesting 4 years for Ohio. And but it's going to be fun to cover. We'll have more headlines based on whatever happens.
All right, very good, Ben. Thank you very much. One more time, quickly, show us the headline tomorrow that people will be seeing in Central Ohio. Kasich GOP roll. All right. And Marison, as always.
Jim, have a good night.
Yeah, good to see you, man. Thank you very much. All right, so Jessa and Mike, that's the headline of the Dispatch. I imagine there will be similar headlines in the Plain Dealer and the Inquirer, but the magic headline, or the headline of the hour, is Republican sweep in the state of Ohio tonight.
And they largely did across the nation, as we've been talking about for months now, as this campaign season has rolled on. Obviously not a clean sweep across the nation. There have been some victories. The Senate in West Virginia, Senate in California.
And Nevada. Harry Reid hung on in Nevada.
Did he, in fact? Good to know. That was a tight race as well.
Right, and it goes to show that Republicans, if they nominated some more moderate candidates in some of these races, Delaware comes to mind, rather than Christine O'Donnell, rather than Sharon Ingle out in Nevada, they had some pretty extreme candidates. If they had nominated some more middle-of-the-road Republicans, there's a good chance that they would have done even better in the election tonight, but that's just speculation looking back. Indeed, it is a very Republican night. You can't take away anything from them. This is a red country tonight.
It's good to know the newspaper guys are up as well, along with us.
It's very inspiring.
Too, and they don't want any Dewey defeats Truman mishap to happen. So tonight it's Kasich defeats Strickland. We're waiting to hear from John Kasich. We'll hear from him straight ahead. Coverage continues here on ONN. Stay with us.